I think that's a great segue into controlling the narrative, because ultimately we talked about motivation, why you're doing it. We talked about what sort of interests and how you have and how they play into things. So how do you then, first of all, recognize a narrative? What is the narrative you're telling? And then how do you bring all this into play to control how an audience perceives it?
When I'm reading a script, I will really, well, first of all, if I don't connect to it, then I'm just gonna pass on it. Like I think I can't do it justice, because if my heart's not into the script, then I don't want to bring that injustice to the production, and I don't think it's fair, So I think for me, in order to really feel like I can tell that story, I have to really get it and understand it, or like have empathy. And so that's kind of my first rule. Like when I read scripts, like if I like it, then yes, I'd love to take a meeting. But if I like it, but I can't connect to it, or I can't see the vision for it,
right,
then I'll either maybe give it a shot, but for the most part, like I can kind of know in my heart if I know I can really elevate the script or not.
That's how you connect to it. But then,
yeah,
when you're reading it, then how do you approach it and extract the story out of it?
Yes, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's not just words and it's not just characters and plot, because then it's just a mechanical shooting of over but there's a story behind it. So how do you personally find that?
Personally, I go through the script scene by scene with the director. Well, first I go myself and I'll make notes and I'll annotate my script, and then I'll go scene by scene with the director, and we'll talk about each scene and why it exists and how that furthers the narrative, and then what's emotional takeaway in a scene, if there is one, or is that more a scene that is just more about exposition, and then the next scene where like the character really emotes. And so like I need to understand every scene and how that plays into the script and why it exists. So that's a very long process.
Oh yeah.
Imagine like if it's a 120-page script for a feature or something, you're like, that's like days, right?
Yeah.
And so for like 1 hour episodic, like Unbelievable, what we did there was Lisa Cholodenko, the director, and I sat in her office and we just went over the script, and I think each script took like 3 to 4 days.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's what we did. We didn't really I wouldn't say we sat and we storyboarded it, because we didn't need to, because we had such a thorough understanding of it.
Right.
And storyboarding can in a very short prep, it takes it's very time consuming. And so like just knowing like with the overhead shots and the diagrams, like just drawing that, for me that's enough. I don't necessarily need to see like a close up or what an over the shoulder looks like. I think at this point, like we all can kind of know what that is and doesn't need to be storyboarded. But for like a bigger sequence, yes, we would look to storyboard artists for that. But for the most part, it was more about the emotional beats and where the character was in her journey.
Right.
And really important because it was so specific, and then we had to remain so subjective.
Right. Yeah, and I think that is personally what I think separates. I think is a cinematographer that's a filmmaker and a storyteller from a cinematographer that simply makes pretty things, right? Because there's a real process, as you're describing, of extracting that, as you're saying, and that's a lot of time. I mean, I've gone through this process a lot myself to know. I mean, and a director, on just on a practical level, a director is so busy with everything. Like, how do you convince production and the director to have that time with you? Because that's, to me, I find to be one of the most challenging things, is to sit down and do that together and carve that. How do you make that a clear priority? Or I mean, I think the good directors, quote unquote, do understand that, but that's not always the case, and you have to fight for that a lot.
Yeah,
right?
you have to, like you said, it's nearly impossible to block out that time. But what you have to do is, as a department head, is make that time and schedule those meetings and say and call the office and say, or walk down the office, walk down and say, hey, can you block out a 4-hour block for the director and myself? Can you clear everything and make sure it happens, because that is the basis for everything. I think is like designing the look of the show.
Right.
Especially for a pilot, you have to really know like what the look is, because it has to be so specific that then if you're not shooting the whole thing, the other cinematographers are able to pick up and continue and to build upon that look.
Right.
So if you don't have anything really set, it's a little trickier. And then there's no perspective.
Right.
And it is just a bunch of pretty pictures, but that's not what we do, right? As filmmakers, we want to really show perspective.
Right, exactly. So and as you've developed, okay, so let's say you've done this, right? You blocked out the time, you wrote all this stuff out in outline form or some sort of shape and form. How do you then implement this? You know, or how do you specifically implement this plan, so to speak, or create a plan and then talk to everybody after the fact? Do you share that kind of thing with everybody, or do you disseminate it in a more simplified form to everybody? You know, what's the more practical way for you to do it?
Well, if time permits, I'll put together like a lookbook. And I'll share that with my crew, with my gaffer, my key grip, and my camera assistants. Because really, I see them as being the people who are able to execute the vision practically. And without, because it's everything, it's all encompassing. Like photography, you need to have the lighting and the contrast ratios and the color that you came up with the director, and everyone has to be able to share that vision, right? Or understand it. And so, and I almost require my whole crew read the scripts, especially my camera assistants. Because focus. I mean, focus pulling is, there's so much narrative in that, right? The timing of that. And the same thing with music, when you're like talking about like, when do you pull, when that person turns their head, what is the flow of that rack? It's so important. It's so important. And thankfully I've been working with the same camera assistants for 10 years, so they kind of get it. Like we there's an unspoken understanding between us. It's very it's a symbiotic relationship, right? Like I need her, she needs me. It's like beautiful. It's unspoken. And so you know, I think that is so important to share your vision with your crew. And so my gaffer, for example, will know like, oh wait, we talked about like this one light being the interrogation light. Like, do you want to apply it here because she's kind of being interrogated by this person? I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. That's really like, you know what I mean? And I love that. I love when like your crew takes on the challenge and the vision and elevates it one step further. And that is just beautiful.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I also think, one of the more challenging things about understanding one's role as a cinematographer, right? And how to live it out, which is, you know, we're leaders of an entire little army, so to speak. So what are some organic, like practical ways to get that kind of that kind of relationship, where they don't just show up for a job, and it becomes more, they are showing up prepared because they care about it. Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of us who have crewed on set can easily just fall into that same rhythm of just, you know, shoot, and then it becomes more about protecting my own rights, which is important, absolutely critically important, but also you then lose sight of each project, what you're doing. So how do you bridge that? What are the techniques that you've found that work for you, or have worked for you, besides baking bread? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think besides baking bread, I mean, there's also like giving away bottles of wine. No, I'm not kidding. I'm really I feel really lucky. Like I've worked with the same people for years and years. And I don't know if it's because they just want money to pay their rent or if they enjoy working with me in that regard. And I play tennis with my camera assistant, and I, have, like I don't see them as just my crew. They're my friends. They're my collaborators. We talk outside of the film set, and I think maybe I'm crossing the line, but who cares? I think it makes for better production than I really value not only their friendship but their professional contributions on set, and there's a trust there. On my last show, my gaffer sent me like baking mitts. And my key grip gave me like a knitting bag. Like, it's just like, it's so nice when you can really see them not only as professionals, but as people who have families and who have lives and interests outside of film. And I think that's really important to me, is that like a lot of my collaborators are foodies or are gardeners or bakers, or have like share the same passions that I do. Wine, for example. So I think, I don't know. It's very organic. I don't like interview, like, I'll look at someone's resume and they say, do you know how to bake? What's the difference between a calendula and a nasturtium? Like, I'm not like trying to find out what their secret powers. But it just happens very organically. The people I gravitate towards are just happen to be those who have outside interests and who really value family, I guess. Like having a family now. Before, I think, I don't know if this is true for you, Tim, but before I had kids, like it was just like work, anything, just travel, work. But now it's like, that job is in New Zealand. Ooh, should I take it? Is it worth it? How, and I only say New Zealand because I just came from New Zealand. But that job to me was really important. It was about a woman dealing with domestic violence, which I thought, like, oh man, like I really want to tell the story, because people who are victims of domestic violence need to be heard.
Right.
And so I took that project and I made a sacrifice. I was like, I'm going to leave my family for 5 months, but they're going to come after 2 months, spend a month there and go back before COVID struck. But, that's a whole other thing. Like you make the sacrifices because you want to tell those stories.
Exactly. And I mean, this is what I've found as well, too, is because even when you're having to go to a different part of the world or country to do a shoot, and you don't have your regular crew, and you need to find within a very, very short period of time people that you can click with as quickly as possible on a personal level. That's an art in of itself, and I feel like that's a bigger part of the job. And I think it's equally important in implementing these ideas that we have, these high-minded ideas of story and emotion, this and that. It doesn't matter if you can't get someone on board to help you achieve it, right? And so I think we're gonna break, and then we're gonna launch into the application of all this, specifically everything we talked about behind what you did on Unbelievable, because I think it was unbelievable what you did. I think on a serious note, I think it's going to be really interesting to see now how this then comes to life in bringing projects to life.